Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today. In this programme we will be discussing Israel's worst mass terrorist attack in history and how this conflict is coming to the UK as we see these mass demonstrations in support of Hamas and the Palestinian cause in our streets, together with a fourfold increase in Jew hatred in this country. So we'll be asking, how should our government respond to this conflict? And in today's programme, I'm joined by Maureen Martin, the President of the Christian People's Alliance, together with Robert Harris from Voice for Justice UK. Maureen, welcome back to Politics Day. It's good to see you. What are your thoughts on what has been the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history? We're seeing that over 1,400 innocent Israeli civilians have been murdered, over 200, if not 300, captured and taken to Hamas, over 3,000 casualties, and then the war crimes and the crimes of genocide committed by Hamas are absolutely horrific. What are your thoughts on what seems to be changing our world right now?
My thoughts are, Simon, these are atrocious, completely unwarranted acts by Hamas, who are a terrorist organisation, by the way, and need to be condemned on every level by everyone. Israel needs to respond decisively and strongly to this attack. There's no negotiating with this type of behaviour. They have proved time and time again they do not want a two-state solution. I heard Joe Biden recently say the only solution going forward is a two-state solution. But it's quite clear that they do not want a two-state solution. It's been offered to them, they've rejected it. Their agenda is the eradication of Israel completely off the map. You cannot negotiate with that. Israel needs to take this opportunity to rid themselves of this pain or thorn in the flesh they've had at the border for many years. It's time they deal with Hamas once and for all.
Well said. And Robert, great to have you back on the programme. Really pleased you can be here today. Please share your thoughts on how the world has changed since Saturday the 7th of October. It almost feels like a 9/11 moment where the world is not the same after this mass terrorist attack against Israel. And the danger is that what happens in Israel doesn't stay in Israel, effectively meaning that what we see in Israel now, we'll see around the Western world. What are your thoughts?
Well, what we saw take place on October the 7th is a horror story, and the whole world should be concerned about it. I think to put some perspective on this, Rishi Sunak's spokesman actually said that these attacks on October the 7th, it was the third deadliest attack in the world since 1970. And I think that brings some perspective on this. And also, I'm very pleased to discover that Rishi Sunak called this a pogrom. Now, this is not language we use nowadays. It's usually used with reference to attacks on Jews in the late 19th century under the Russian Empire, into the early 20th century, even under Nazism. But I think that brings a perspective on how serious and how tragic this is. So the world needs to recognise the gravity of the horror that we've witnessed.
Absolutely, and it's good that Rishi has actually called this a pogrom, as you rightly say. And Maureen, what are your thoughts? Firstly, we saw that on Monday, the 9th of October, only 2 days after this horrendous terrorist attack, we saw a mass pro-Hamas Palestinian demonstration in High Street, Kensington, very close to the Israeli embassy, where they boarded the Israeli embassy up for protection. And then on the past Saturday, we've seen 30,000 plus people coming out in a pro-Palestinian rally in support of the Palestinians' cause. We saw that there were supporters full of hate and chanting anti-Semitic sentiment. What are your thoughts on how this conflict has now come to the streets of London and across the United Kingdom?
Is it any wonder that we have these demonstrations? We've had a steady stream of immigration or migration coming from the Middle East for many years. We have Syrian refugees, we have Afghan refugees. Inherently, Islam is anti-Semitic. Its very teachings are such. They teach their children to call Jews pigs and apes. It's in the Quran. So is it any wonder that the people that have come from these other nations, i.e. the Middle East, are pro-Palestinian and pro what Hamas are doing? And of course they are. they're inherently anti-Semitic. So unfortunately, when we get immigration from Middle Eastern countries and particularly Muslims, they don't integrate very well into our, Judeo-Christian culture. They stay very distinct and very separate. And of course, you can practice your religion, but the religion itself is anti-Semitic. So there's no wonder that we have these demonstrations. And also another point, the things they were saying are hate speech. So it shouldn't be considered an arrestable offence, because hate speech is against the law in this country, the last time I looked. And they are quite busy arresting street preachers for preaching from the Bible and accusing them of hate speech. So why is it they cannot apply the same rules to these demonstrations who are espousing hate speech? It's clearly anti-Semitic, clearly quite strongly against Jews, and they also want to eradicate Israel from off the face of the map. It's quite clear. They're not, quiet about it. So as far as I'm concerned, this is hate speech, should be treated as such.
Absolutely, and the Met should do a lot more to stamp it out.
Absolutely.
Robert, understand that we live in a democracy, and part of a democracy is the right to kind of peaceful protest, even those who advocate and support the Palestinian cause. But where there is that crossover from supporting the Palestinian people and then using chants of genocide, such as Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, is incitement to genocide, because from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea is the Jewish state, is the nation of Israel. They want it to be free, so effectively they're calling for genocide against the Jewish people. There's other, and we've seen that this week that Hamas has committed torture. They have mutilated body parts, they burnt people alive, they killed babies, they've raped young women, they've taken the elderly, including Holocaust survivors, back to Gaza. Where is the condemnation of Hamas attacks regarding these protests, and why are they just so full of hate towards Israel and the Jewish people?
There's a lot to say in response to that question. I think the first thing we should recognise is that Israel has a right to exist. The second point to recognise is that when a country is attacked, and Israel has been attacked, it has the right to defend itself. But it's not only a right, it's an obligation. Every country's leader has an obligation to defend its citizens when they're attacked. Plain and simple. I think we should consider what is anti-Semitism in the contemporary world. Now, there's a widely accepted definition that's provided by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And they provide what they call a working definition with 11 points of what anti-Semitism looks like in the modern world. And 43 countries have actually signed up to that definition. They've endorsed it. The UK is included in that, of course. I did note, actually, when I last looked, that it was mostly European countries, which is a bit concerning. Many organisations, be it universities, regional state authorities, have signed up to this definition. Now, I want to pluck out one of those 11 points which I think is relevant to this discussion.
Absolutely.
It talks about, this is anti-Semitism. One illustration is when someone is effectively saying that Israel doesn't have a right to self-determination. In other words, they don't have a right to exist, they don't have a right to defend themselves. And that the other part of that illustration is that Israel is, quote unquote, a racist endeavour. In other words, Zionism, there's a phrase that a lot of anti-Semitic people use, they call it, they say Zionism is racism. Well, it's very clear from that definition, which our government has signed up to, that if you're chanting in a public place from the river to the sea, that is a racist, it's racist motivated, it's genocidal, as you rightly pointed out. So, of course, the burden is on the authorities to actually do something about it in line with our law.
Oh, absolutely. Maureen, I just want to draw your attention to this article in the Telegraph that's concerning this. So we know that, for example, Rishi Sunak has been very strong and supportive of the Jewish community who are very scared, they're very frightened at this time. We've seen a 500% increase in anti-Semitic instances over the past week. We've seen that our Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has been incredibly strong, as well as James Cleverly, our Foreign Secretary. But according to Telegraph, off here. It says that the Muslim Council says that Braverman is wrong over anti-Semitic chant. It says the Muslim Council of Britain has claimed from the river to the sea chant is not anti-Semitic, as it is attacked the Home Secretary for suggesting it was. They said in a series of tweets, a spokesman for the MCB defended the chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, was shouted by protesters at the weekend after Suella Braverman warned that it caused alarm to Jews and all decent people. Is the Muslim Council of Britain defending the undefensible by actually saying that this chant that is shouted at the top of their voices across these Palestinian demonstrations, which is an incitement to genocide, is not anti-Semitic? How can calling for genocide against the Jewish people not be anti-Semitic?
Well, of course it is. We know it is. But they're always trying to go under the radar. This is the problem. Islam's always trying to present itself as being non-violent. We're a peaceful religion. But those that profess to follow the religion are committing all kinds of terrorist acts and atrocious crimes around the world. You know, this least recent attack on Israel is not their first, time. I mean, we've seen 9/11, all the major terrorist attacks around the world have been basically committed by Islamic terrorists. But Islam likes to couch itself in this kind of persona that it's not violent. And again, this is the rhetoric that is going along those same lines. Braverman was quite right. It is genocidal. It's clearly anti-Semitic. But again, the rhetoric, the narrative, is trying to present Islam in a different way. I mean, after 9/11, the first thing George Bush Jr. said was, Islam the peaceful religion. Well, how can you say that when your nation just experienced one of its most horrific terrorist attacks by Islamists, Muslimists, and you're saying Islam peaceful? This is clearly not so. And again, this is Islam trying to present itself as being something it's not, to fool everyone to thinking these acts of terrorism are separate from the religion. They're not separate, they're one and the same. Islam endorses this type of behaviour. The Quran is quite clear about what you do with infidels and those who do not follow the religion. And it's, as I said before, it's inherently anti-Semitic. And they are just following along with, they are, there to do their propagandists, and they're the front line for the narrative that Islam is a peaceful religion, which is not the truth.
Yeah. And Robert, I remember meeting the former French Prime Minister under President Mitterrand back in 2007. And her chilling words were to me that Britain doesn't take speech seriously enough. So where we see, for example, these chants of genocide, support, even for, in Scotland, some of the pro-Palestinian supporters of saying, and also in Sydney as well, have actually said that we need to gas the Jews and Hitler was right, all these kind of things. Isn't there a kind of realisation now amongst our government and a seriousness to wake up to the fact that incitement is a massive problem in this country, and if we see incitement on our streets, then it leads to violence, and how it's imperative that we actually clamp down on this violent extremism and hate speech that is allowed to go on our universities, allowed to go on our schools, allowed to go on our public place, and even at big demonstrations. Isn't it imperative that Suella Braverman gets to grips with this?
It is, and I think she understands the seriousness of this. Just to start from some first principles, okay, we all want to exercise our right to freedom of speech. Now, in that 11-point definition of anti-Semitism, there's one point which talks about criticising Israel as a state. And it recognises, as we all do, that everyone has the right to criticise Israel as a state in the same way that you would criticise any other country. Not on separate terms, not on special terms, in the same way as you criticise any other country. And of course, in some of these demonstrations, when you hear the language and the opinions being expressed, you clearly see a departure from that basic principle. So the police have a lot of burden on their hands because they're trying to balance the right to freedom of speech. But we've seen some very explicit examples of what I think, and I think what you think, is anti-Semitic hatred. Well, anti-Semitism is hatred, of course. So Suella Braverman is right to put pressure on the police. She is recognising that they're doing a good job, but I think she's adding pressure to them because I think there's a concern that not enough people have actually been arrested when they have expressed open displays of raw hatred towards Jews. And I wonder whether if such hatred were directed to other minorities in this country, whether it would be tolerated in the same way. I have a suspicion, there is a difference, and I feel uncomfortable about that.
Yeah, and Maureen, I just want to read this out from the Telegraph. So, according to a recent article in the Telegraph, this regarding the rallies across the country in support of the Palestinian cause, it says that photos showed some of these attending the demonstrations wearing images of paragliders on their backs in an echo of a tactic used by Hamas to infiltrate Israeli terror last weekend to massacre 1,400 people. And of course, we saw the paragliders came into Israel to kill all of those young people at the music festival. I think 260 were murdered. It says in Glasgow, a video showed one woman draped in a Palestinian flag shouting, "Free Palestine, don't forget where the Jews were in 1940. Chants in Arabic caught on video at the London rally included, "Oh Jews, the army Muhammad is returning." What are your thoughts on how our nation has really descended into the pit with these horrendous demonstrations taking place? And there's a difference between a peaceful protest and demonstration and incitement to violence and just pure hatred.
Well, again, it's back to what I said before about the population of Islam that are here. They are still Muslims at the end of the day, and they are still anti-Semitic. These sentiments or these statements they are, saying at these rallies is their desire that they want to inhabit that land Israel is in. They want a caliphate to return. This is why they're harping back to, Muhammad is returning, because as far as they're concerned, Muhammad was the last great caliphate, or maybe the Ottoman Empire was really. But they want that to return. That means Israel must be gone. So whatever the method, if it's going to be Hamas and the extreme violence we've seen, or some other method, their end goal is the same. You have moderate Muslims who say, we condemn the violence, but at the end of the day, their end game is the same. They want the caliphate to return, and they want to inhabit that land Israel is in. They want it. That's why there's no two-state solution with these people. Okay, so all this, rhetoric about, the only solution is the two-state solution, or the moderate Muslims saying, we condemn these small group of extremists who are doing this. They don't really, because at the end of the day, they want the same thing. The method they may disagree on, but at the end of the day, the end goal is the same. And that's how it is.
And Robert, we're witnessing rising tensions and war in the Middle East, and we know that this is having a huge impact upon our Jewish communities here. For example, we're now finding that Jewish people are scared to be identified as being Jewish. Some young Jewish students are afraid to wear the Star of David, the Magen David, on their neck in fear of attacks or reprisals. We also saw at one demonstration, a Jewish guy was being chased and threatened to be stabbed. We also see that last Friday, Jewish schools actually closed in fear of attack. Now, if you've ever been to a Jewish school, like it's a fortress to get through. There are metal detectors, there are security guards, they're surrounded by barbed wire fencing. Just share with us how the Jewish community right now in this climate of hatred are feeling the full force of this, and how can they be blamed for the actions of the Israeli government or the Israeli Defense Force when they don't have any decisions over the Israeli government or what decisions Israel makes, because they are Jews and they live in this country?
In a country like ours, no one should be living in fear of who they are in terms of their race or their religion. We have laws to protect people. This is the concerning thing. We have all the law there already. The question shouldn't be what new laws can we bring onto the statute book to protect people. No, we've got the laws against racism, against incitement to religious hatred. Question is, when and how are they going to be applied? When we've seen these open displays of hatred on the streets, and therefore, as you point out, Jewish people in this country are living in fear now, and it's only going to get worse unless the full force of the law is imposed on those who have committed these acts of hatred.
Yeah. And Maureen, I just want to read out to you the remarks made by our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who said, "At moments like this, when the Jewish people are under attack in their homeland, Jewish people everywhere can feel less safe. We've seen intimidating behaviour, shameful anti-Semitism online and on our streets, and attempts to stir up tensions. I say, not here, not in Britain, not in our country, not in this century. We will do everything we possibly can to protect the Jewish community in our country. And if anything is standing in the way of keeping the Jewish community safe, we'll fix it." Strong words and strong rhetoric from our Prime Minister there. Are you pleased with his response to this crisis and the fact that he visited Finchley Synagogue on the Monday? He was yesterday at a Jewish school giving reassurance. This is something that he really believes in and is really making him in what looks like a very good Prime Minister out of all of this crisis.
Indeed. Yeah, I'm very happy with the Prime Minister's statements. And in fact, I really hope this leads to us moving our embassy to Jerusalem. I really hope that is something he's considering now. And, you know, back to some biblical principles here. I mean, God said to Abraham, "Whoever blesses you, bless you, curses you, cursed." So by him even just making this statement, it's a step towards us getting back on the right side of Israel. For a few years now, our relationship with Israel, our support for Israel has not been as strong as it should have been. I'm so glad he's made this statement to reiterate once again we are allies with Israel and will always be. And I hope this also means we're not going to accept any refugees from Gaza, because I can see the end game, as always, is we have a steady stream of refugees coming from these displaced people, displaced through wars caused by, you know, mostly Islamic terrorists. So I hope that means he's going to say no to Gaza refugees, because if our Jewish communities are feeling unsafe now, how unsafe are they going to feel if we have a steady stream of Gaza refugees coming to this nation? It's going to make things 1,000 times worse. So I hope that means no to Gaza refugees.
And Robert, the fact that we've seen 30,000, if not more, pro-Palestinian supporters make their views very clearly known, their hatred and their vile rhetoric, even incitement to genocide. Shouldn't this worry our government that these people could pose a national security threat? And isn't what we're seeing now a kind of incitement to kind of violence? We've already seen it in Brussels with two Swedish football fans who were murdered in cold blood. Isn't this now a license for terrorists across the UK to carry out terrorist attacks and atrocities against our fellow countrymen because of this rising climate of hatred?
I think there's a lot of currency in what you say. I can't help but consider the BBC in the context of what you've asked me, because the BBC is our national broadcaster. It's funded by the licence fee. It claims to be adhering to rules regarding impartiality in the way that news is presented to the public. And on this occasion, regarding the events of October the 7th, it refuses to call the attacks on Israeli citizens as terrorism, as terrorists. It refuses to call it terrorism. And it claims that it does so on the basis of adhering to impartiality rules. However, when 9/11 happened, it had no difficulty in calling those attackers terrorists. It's not bound, as it claims to be, by the Ofcom guidance, which gives the guidance on all sorts of matters. It's not restricted by it. It's mere guidance. Now, of course, other broadcasters do different things. Some follow the BBC line, others call these people terrorists. I think what this is actually showing us in the context of your question is that when you get the BBC, a public institution that really, in many ways, defines this country, it's lending legitimacy to hatred. I think it's that clear, really, when you get something so central to the fixture and fittings of the United Kingdom, and indeed the world, because they've got the BBC World Service. This is lending legitimacy to hatred, and John Simpson, whom I have great respect for, he's the World Affairs editor for the BBC, He's done a great job in his career. Recently, I think it's absolutely disgraceful what he said on behalf of his employer. He said that the BBC, in the context of this discussion about why they won't call the Hamas attackers terrorists, because we cannot be seen to take sides. People need to make their own mind up. But the BBC takes sides all the time when it comes to human rights issues, when it comes to all sorts of racial, ethnic, religious, sexual minorities around the world who are under terrible attack. The BBC takes sides. There's a value system there, and they don't apologise for that.
Yeah, so let's unpack this a little bit, what you've actually said there, Robert. So effectively, Hamas have an ideology that's very similar to Nazism. And if we were in the position we were in 1939, confronting that existential threat from Nazi Germany, and we were told by a national broadcaster not to take sides, and we have to give the Nazi side of the argument, that would pose a direct threat to our national security. It would undermine our very ability to defend ourselves, and allow the media to erode our national government. Churchill's response to Hitler's invasion of the Benelux countries, including France as well, and then for potential attack against Britain. Is it a case that the BBC can't see evil when evil is staring it in its face?
Well, clearly not. Let's just remind ourselves that Hamas is recognised by the UK government in law as a terrorist organisation. That's fact. That's not an opinion, that's fact. There are many other countries who form part of the civilised world of nations who recognise the same point. So why is the BBC having difficulty in just recognising what is a fact, both morally and legally?
Good question. We need to ask the BBC that one. And within 30 seconds, Maureen, as we come to the end of the programme, how imperative is it for our viewers watching that we also show comfort and support to our Jewish community who are feeling very scared at this time of rising Jew hatred?
Absolutely. As Christians, we are called to support the Jewish community because we are part of them. You know, it's called the Judeo-Christian ethic for a reason, because without Judaism there'd be no Christianity, without Judaism there'd be no Jesus. So we are called to support them and stand with them all times.
Robert, Maureen, thank you so much for doing a great job on this week's Politics Today. I want to thank you for watching this programme. We can't afford to allow this incitement to genocide, this incitement to violence take to our streets against Israel and against our beleaguered Jewish community. We need to pray for peace in our streets, but also show comfort and support to not only Israel, but also to our Jewish communities in the UK. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.